All right. Hi there, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here today. My name is John Ongermeyer, and I'm going to talk a little bit about counted cross stitch. I am largely self-taught, though it does run in my family. It seems like everyone in my family for several generations has cross stitched, and I picked it up one day and seemed to just love it. If you could, we are asking folks to mute themselves during the demonstration. If you do have questions, we are encouraging you to put them in the chat, and we can either have someone funnel them to me and I can answer them, or we can save them until later. And at the end of the demonstration, you can unmute in case you do have any questions at that point as well. I will be talking about quite a few products that they have here at the shop. And so links for those products will be posted in the chat as well while I talk about them. If you do find that you are looking for something and they don't have it, or they are out of something, feel free to call the shop and they will see what they can do, and they will do the best they can to get you what you need. All right, so today, the first thing I want to talk about is just to make sure that we are talking about one thing, not two different things. So this is a needlework pattern. This is going to be more needlework. I've also heard it called stamped cross stitch, though there's some debate as to the fabric being used. This is a more coarse kind of fabric than what you typically use for cross stitching. So today I will be using this pattern. This is what you will find in the shop. And I have started it. You can see right here. That's the top. You can kind of see, I gotta find just the right light because it's a very subtle difference in the floss on this one, the embroidery floss. And I do also have a few finished projects of some patterns, some other patterns that they sell here at the shop. Also Fireside Original patterns. I'm not sure you have them in stock currently, but you might. It's the Four Seasons. This was a surprise. I didn't think I would have this one in time. So we got this one, and it's 4 seasons. So there's 2 of the seasons there. I unfortunately don't remember which mountain is which season right now. And there are the other 2, and you can see there are some, there's a couple different stitches in there that I will be talking about today. If you want to go ahead and switch to the hands, I can actually point out some of those differences. All right, so if you look here on the Long's Peak one, you can see that the body, the main part of it right here, that's the cross part of the stitch, the cross stitch. And these definition lines here that make the ridges and the branches here for, I believe this is fall actually. Those are back stitches. And so I will talk a little bit about both of those. As you can see, I have my patterns sort of laid out. And so let's jump into what all you're gonna need to cross stitch. So you're gonna obviously need the pattern. This is the one that I've been working from. This is a clean one, just sort of so that we can start from scratch and know where to go. And this is just the cover so you know what it looks like here in the shop. For the various kinds of fabrics that they carry here in the shop that you would like to look for cross stitching, if you are a beginner cross stitcher, I highly recommend using Aida. Or AIDA, Aida cloth. It comes in varying counts, and this, oh, that's very shiny. Let me get this open real quick. Try not to do it too close to the microphone, or I'll just talk over it very loudly while I open the package. This is, I believe, 14 counts. And what that means is some black fabric. What that means is there are 14 of these little, I'll get it really close to the camera, of those little boxes There's 14 of those per inch. So that typically you will see 14, 16, and 18 count. So the higher the number, the more stitches per inch, which means the smaller the X you will be making. And so they're the inversely proportional backwards math words. Yes, I know math words, right? Needles. Next thing you're going to need a needle to put some of this embroidery floss through the fabric, of course. I find is just a sort of personal preference. It depends on how much you want to stab yourself in the finger. You can use the blunt edge tapestry ones. They also have some very nice easy thread needles here in the shop. They also have very specific embroidery and cross stitch needles. I personally have a favorite needle that I think is just a sharp needle that I found somewhere, but I've used it so much that the tip is fairly blunted, so it doesn't hurt. I still poke myself a fair amount, but it's not too bad. Once you have your fabric and your needle picked out, you're going to need the embroidery hoop. If you've done any embroidery, you know how these work. Pop open, place the fabric inside. Obviously, this tag will not be here. Place the fabric inside, push down, little screw, screw it as tight as you can. And once you get that fabric in there, I like to have the fabric fairly tight. So you'll see there's a little bit of a ridge here on the hoop. So that's okay. And this knob is pretty much as tight as I can get it. And that'll keep the fabric from moving around on you too much. I prefer it fairly tight. The great thing about cross stitching is that once you know a few basic rules and suggestions and tips, a lot of it is up to you as to how to get from point A to point B. And there's a lot of ways you can make it your own besides the pattern itself. So next I want to talk a little bit about the embroidery floss. If you're familiar with embroidery floss at all, you know about DMC. They are the most popular, most used brand of embroidery floss. I think Anchor would probably be the next most popular. They have all kinds, I think most of the colors, even the new colors, if not all of the colors here at the shop, in a lovely little nook. And when you're picking out colors for patterns, if you are creating your own pattern, you do want to keep in mind what kind of fabric you're going to be using. Let me say that again and switch it around. When you're picking your fabric, you want to be conscious of the colors in the pattern. So if you have a color palette, something like this, that would be a great one. Either one of these fabrics would be very good, but the black might not go quite as well with these darker browns and darker blues. So it's just things to keep in mind as you're looking at that. I also want to talk briefly about some variegated floss. Yep, there it is. I separated it and then covered it. So the variegated floss is just like variegated yarn. However, there is a very specific way to stitch with variegated floss. If you are going to use variegated floss, this would be a great sky color. Then you want to do the technique that is called single journey. And I will talk a little bit more about what that means in just a little bit when I get to the how we actually go about doing the cross stitching. And obviously you need the pattern. They also have a very great book here, a how to embroider, and it includes a how to cross stitch section in there. They have a great book here at the shop that I would highly recommend. The other few things that I would recommend are just some highlighters and some craft scissors. So next question is, where do you start? So you always start in the middle. This ensures that the piece will have enough room around the edges of the stitched area to either frame, hem, or hang. But how do you know how big of a piece of fabric to start with? They actually, this is the most common way that I use it is there is a cross stitch calculator that we pull up all the time on Yarntree. I think it's yarntree.com. If you Google cross stitch calculator, I think it's like the first thing that pops up. And it will tell you if you put in the number of stitches. So if we look at this pattern, these patterns here, the Sago Lily, which is the one that we are doing, it is 67 stitches wide and 33 stitches high. And so you can just put those stitches, that stitch dimension into that calculator, and it'll tell you as well as the count of fabric, how many strands of floss you are using, and how many inches around the border or around the stitched area you want. That will then do all of the calculations for you and tell you how big of a piece of fabric to buy. And then you can do a very simple little trick. Since I opened this black one, so we're starting in the middle. I want to find the middle of my fabric, and this is awesome because it's already been done for me since it was in the package. But all you do is you take the fabric, fold it in half, fold it in half again. Make sure those creases are nice, and I like to crease it quite a bit because you're going to be working with the fabric a fair amount, and it'll loosen up and get rid of those creases as you're working with it. So then when you open it back up, where those creases intersect, that's your center. Then you want to make sure that you take your hoop and get that intersection. Let's see, I'm fairly certain I always put these on upside down, but you know what? If it works, it works. So you put one side underneath, make sure this is not super tight so that it has room to grab that fabric around the hoop. Sometimes you got to work with it a little bit. Sometimes you got to tell it to work with you. There we go. And get that nice and tight in there. Let's screw down. And that is how you're going to mount the fabric into the embroidery hoop itself. All right. So next thing you need to do is find the center of the pattern so that you know what to put in the middle of your fabric. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. So on this, I'm going to actually demonstrate first with the Alpine Lily pattern because it does have a slightly different, this is one thing you will encounter. So I want you to look very closely at what I've highlighted already. So you see the arrow that's highlighted at the top. I'm going to make sure there's only one arrow that's highlighted at the top. There we go. And the arrow that is highlighted on the left hand of the screen. Those are your center arrows. And what you are looking for is where those two arrows meet. So in this one, the arrows actually meet where a line is. And so when that happens, you can kind of pick and choose which side of the line to start on. Just be conscious of which side of the line you are starting on your fabric as well. All right, and so on the Sago Lily, the one that I have been working on for this wonderful Mayflowers demo day, we can find, you take your highlighter, you can find your center arrow, find your center arrow, and then just trace it into the middle. And on this one, when you look at it, it almost looks like this big section of zeros would be where you would start your pattern. I'm going to scoot this down just a little bit. I'm probably going to have to. There we go. It's got to be a little, be firm with it. Sorry, you're fine. All right. There we go. Technology. It's great. All right. So when you look at this pattern, it looks like those zeros would really be where you would start. But these center arrows are pointing you towards the middle of the N on the left-hand side. So you're going to find in your, well, oh, fortunately, the N is on here. So you're going to go over to your thread legend and find the symbol that corresponds and find the thread. So we're going to look for 745, which I know I have with me. Okay, and so, and like I said, there was at some point I mentioned something about the number of strands of floss you want to use. So I'm going to talk about that for just a second. The number of strands of floss that you want to use is sort of up to you, depending on how vibrant you want the colors to be. The more vibrant the color you want, the more strands of floss you want to use. I typically use 3. So, and embroidery floss comes in strands of 6. So you're going to separate out 3 strands, thread your needle. And you're going to thread the needle so that there is a tail on one end. We aren't going to tie any knots for this. And you're going to find that center. And so we're going to go back to the pattern for a second so that we know what we're doing. Because another key tip for cross stitching is to plan ahead. Plan where you're going. And this is where the journeys come in. So when you go on a journey in real life, you don't want to carry too much. And cross stitchers were very nice and made it a very nice little metaphor in that when you stitch a row, you can stitch it by going on 1 journey or 2 journeys. That essentially means you'd go down the row once, which is 1 journey, or twice, which is 2 journeys. All right, and so when you're going down the row once, I want you to watch the highlighter. So if I'm going down the row once, it's going to go this way, and that is it. And what you're going to do is you're going to do both legs of the X at once for 1 journey. Then if you're going to do 2 journeys, I'll take this longer one. It's going to be 1 leg of the X all the way across, and then the other leg of the X on the way back. So you end up on the same side where you end up in the same square where you started on that row or column. If you take 1 journey, you're going to end up on the opposite side of the column or row that you started on. All right, so I recommend taking a highlighter and just highlighting a couple rows at a time and saying, I'm gonna stitch that much. We're gonna stitch that much. And that's a lot. We're not actually gonna stitch that much in the next 10 minutes, but I am gonna show you how to get started on how to do that. So if you noticed, that end that I picked out the first time is sort of in the middle here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the center. Oh, and now I think I know how to make it work for me now. Just got to be a little tough with it. There we go. Now I need a little bit more space. There we go. Okay. So you're going to find the center and you're going to start from the back And you're just gonna kind of poke around. We're gonna find the center or close enough to the center. Honestly, with a piece that is this small on a piece of fabric this big, you can approximate the center. You can, you know, as long as you're in that general area of where that intersection is, you'll be fine. So the first thing you want to do is pull the thread all the way, almost all the way through, and then turn it over so that you can sort of grab what's left and hold it down with one finger. Now this has taken me lots of practice to get to the point where I can do this. Sometimes I'm holding it with my chin if it's a bigger hoop. But you can also, once you get it sort of on one side, you can pinch down on the other side so that it's not going to go anywhere. Because when you come back through, so what you want to do is make an X. Now or make half of an X. So you can go either from here, I can go 4 directions. I can go down here. Let's see if I can get this in the light a little bit better. Let's see, I can go down diagonally so that here, we'll do this. It can go down diagonally this way. It can go down diagonally this way. And I can go up in both directions as well. So the thing is, you are always going to be moving in a diagonal direction from in each stitch. So I'm going to go down and to the left, pull this all the way through, but don't pull too hard. It gets very frustrating when you just keep pulling that tail through. And then you want to make sure the tail on the back is going to be tacked down. And for when you're on the back, on this side, your stitches are going to be going vertically or horizontally. All right, so those ones are going to be the straight lines between the points in the Aida cloth. So you pull that up. And for this one, for these first 3, I'll do 2 journeys. So you count out 3 stitches. And the nice thing is, once you get those first few done, and that tail tacked down, you don't have to hold on to it anymore, and you can just kind of go for it. And so we count out 3 stitches, and I'm going to go back to that center square that I started with. I am keeping an eye on the time. And I'm going to wrap up. I was hoping to get to back stitching as well. Okay. So there we go. That's the first 3 stitches are going to look like this. And that was simply by making an X, going from the top right to the bottom left, and then going from the top left to the bottom right. Now, the great thing is those X's can go in any direction. It doesn't have to be that order of how you put the needle into the fabric and pull it out. Once you get the rhythm of I want the legs of the X facing this direction, then you can kind of you can start the stitch in any of the 4 corners. So on this one, this section will do 1 journey. And so we're going to pull up on the hole next to it, on the stitch next to it. Go down. So we're starting in that top right again, going down to the bottom left. And to do both at the same time, both legs at the same time, you simply go straight up to the top left and cross over to the bottom right. And you just keep doing that. And the reason I know that there are 6 of these to begin with is because that's what the pattern tells me. We can look at this pattern and say, so the darkly shaded in was the centerpiece. And so there are 6 ends in a row. That just means 6 stitches in a row in that color. And you'll see these other colors or these other symbols in here are for other colors. Unfortunately, my copy of this one, there it is. Here's the full symbol chart if you want to see it. And what I want to mention with the back stitching is it's these dark lines in the pattern. That's what the back stitching is. And so I think what I'm gonna do, yeah, okay. I'm just gonna back stitch around this little rectangle. Because that hey, it's at least it's a demonstration, right? I was hoping that I would be able to do a little bit of the back stitching on the Sego lily that I have partially completed. And the thing to consider with back stitching is the impact you want to make with the back stitch. Do you want to outline or do you want to emphasize? Typically back stitching is going to be a darker color than the color you are trying to outline. And I think I'd say more vibrant if it's a emphasis or a highlight kind of thing. I should have showed that. All right, and so when you've got all of the stitches, all the stitches that you want, there's a little bit of there's a little fuzzy. So you can just sort of trim those up. If you do have some fuzzies like that, it's also possible that you just caught a little bit of the thread on the back here. And so if you just very, very gently take the tip of your needle and sort of poke around and see if there's anything that's kind of loose or poked through to the front that you can gently grab and pull through the back. That'll clean up any stray frays or hairs going on. So once you have all 6 stitches or all the stitches that you would like, or you're at the end of your floss, the length of floss that you have, and be sure not to grab too much. I go with about 1.5 arms length of floss. If you try to do too much, you'll get a lot of knots and tangles, and it just becomes even more frustrating. So you're going to turn it over to the back, and to just sort of secure it up, you're just going to hook the needle very gently through the loops that you've made in the back. This means you don't want to be stitching these all too tightly. You don't want to be making the X's super tight so that you can still fit a needle and the thread through there, and then just pull it tight and trim it up. All right, let's see. I'm going to use this. This is a good one. Back stitching. So when it comes to back stitching, you're typically going to use 1 strand of floss because it is meant to be more of a definition aspect of the piece as opposed to the main feature. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of the 742. All of the DMC floss is organized with numbers, hence the symbols on the pattern and the legend for you to use. And they have like thousands. I don't know how many they have, but it's too many. It's not too many. it's fantastic for someone like me. Backstitching, I have to admit, is not my forte. And so on backstitching, I do still tie a knot. And so I'll go ahead and do that real quick. Usually you got to tie a couple, because the holes, especially in things like in the smaller count, so the larger stitched, the smaller, remember, the smaller the count, the larger the stitches. The holes in the fabric are a little bit bigger, so you want to do that. And then if you want to, you can also do the same thing that you did when finishing up with the other floss and just sort of catch it so that the knot catches there as well, and there's a little bit of a safety. And so what I'm going to do to backstitch around this is I'm just going to make a square around it. And the first time I tried backstitching, I did this. I went up on one corner and all the way down to the other corner. And if anybody has done backstitching on cross stitching before, that's close. I had the spirit, but I wasn't quite right. So what, and here's the other thing, if you do mess up, this is what I do. I don't take everything out unless I absolutely have to. I rather just unstitch it, I guess. Just pull it back through. So to backstitch, you want to go one stitch at a time. And it's going to be just one little square. Up on the next one. Back down. And you're going to do that just all the way around. And you will have it eventually backstitched so that there's a rectangle all the way around it. Trying to catch the light. There's subtlety in all of the different floss that can get you a little bit. So you got to be very careful when picking out your floss that you're paying attention to your numbers and all of that. So yeah, I think I will continue with the back stitching on the screen, but if there's any questions, I think we can have folks unmute and ask away, and I can see if I can answer them.
I didn't see any in the chat, but you're welcome to unmute.
Yeah.
No question.
Okay, I have a question.
No question?
I have a question. When you're,
Yes.
you have different sections where you have a whole block of the same color. How far would you carry the floss to the next section before you would cut it and start over?
You know, it depends on how much you care about the back.
Well, I'm wondering too, wouldn't some of the dark bleed through if you're carrying the dark a long ways and then doing it a light color over the dark?
That's true. I think that part depends a little bit more on the fabric you're using. If you're doing it on a white fabric, which is not my personal favorite, mostly just because it's very hard to keep clean while you're stitching. There's a chance that could happen, but there's also, I would say if it's a full coverage piece, you can carry as much as you want. If you're going to be going over sections where there isn't any stitching that you're going to see from the front, I would cut at that point so that you're not having it like, if it's under the actual stitching itself, it's okay. But yeah, if it's going to be jumping a gap, unless it's like 2 or 3 stitches at the most. If there's a gap of more than 2 or 3 stitches where there's not going to be anything stitched at all, that's where I would do it. But otherwise, I have pieces where I was not paying attention to the backs at all, and there's just string everywhere.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, thank you, John.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right.
I'll go ahead and mute it again.